Good afternoon and welcome to today's edition of Ask Judge Carol Live, where I am on a mission to educate you and demonstrate how the law applies in your life and my life, so in our everyday lives, because I certainly believe that the law can help you and it can work for you once you know how it applies. Now, today's topic is on environmental law, and I have to admit at the outset that this is a very vast topic, and when I wanted to focus on it, it turned out to be much more broader than I had imagined. I had some general understanding, and as I'm going to demonstrate today, it is a vast topic and very important. So let's get into it. So the environment and environmental laws comes under the governance of it within the country comes under the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, which has some departments under it, which include the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection and the Department of Environmental Health Services. So my focus today is really going to be on environmental health services. So that's going to be the focus of today. Now, the question that you may have in your mind, and the question I have for you is, can you really be fined for dumping on an empty lot? What if you ignore an environmental health notice? And can persons actually go to jail? So it's what every Bahamian needs to know about these rules, because it affects every household and every business. And I'll just say here that I had a very interesting meeting at the Department of Environmental Health this week, trying to get an understanding of how the laws affect us. So I was really looking to figure out, can someone be punished for pollution, things like throwing bottles and bags of waste in the garbage, dumping of appliances, couches, washing machines, old fridges. You see a lot of that, unfortunately, when you drive around the island of New Providence. The proliferation of abandoned and derelict vehicles. And it bothers me, and so I would imagine that it also bothers you. Now, as we dive into this topic, here is the thought process and the concept that I would like for you to keep in mind. Many of us like the idea of living in a gated community. And I dare say that aside from the benefit of security, the perceived benefit of, you have a gate and there may or may not be security guards manning the gate. And so there's that sense of security. But generally speaking, we find that in these gated communities, they're also cleaner, well-maintained, well-kept, manicured even, you could say. And so we aspire to live in that kind of neighborhood and that kind of environment. Well, I am going to suggest to you today that the Department of Environmental Health Services, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and the ministry and then the departments, they are really our gatekeepers. They are our maintenance department, really, for the island of New Providence and for the entire Bahamas, because they're responsible for things like roads, parks, and verges that we all traverse along. They're responsible for removal of waste, solid waste, and those kinds of amenities, if you will, that affect each of the areas that we live in. And so we ought to pay attention and support the work of the Department of Environmental Health Services, if only for the fact that, we would like the place where we live to be clean, well-maintained, and manicured. And that's part of their remit, not the entire remit, but that's part of it. And we're going to get to some more of that today. So the purpose of the Act, so we have an Environmental Health Services Act and the Environmental Planning and Protection Act. So the Health Services Act is the one that governs sanitation, litter, derelict vehicles, and nuisances. Those are mainly covered in that particular legislation. And then the Environmental Planning and Protection Act covers pollution control, hazardous waste, coral reefs, and those kinds of things. Now, again, another concept that I would like you to keep in mind as we're talking about this, I know that for some of us, the idea of environmental protection can seem a little bit distant and not necessarily direct. What does that have to do with me? Those people out there have to deal with coral reefs. Not many of us locally, we're not going out yachting or boating or even fishing. A smaller element of the population is engaged in those activities and services. However, the same way that we can think about environmental health services as being our maintenance for the island, maintenance for the country, to keep us clean, green and pristine, as that saying used to say, then you can think about environmental protection for our land resources, as well as our marine and ocean resources, as being the gatekeepers for us in support of our tourism industry, if you will. If you want a way to sort of connect the dots for you, then the tourists that come here, the millions of tourists that come to the Bahamas every year, they don't come because our waters are muddy and ugly and pollution filled. They come because our waters are beautiful, turquoise, aquamarine waters, clear that you can see through, a big variety of marine life, fishes and other seafood, and the trees that live under the ocean. There probably is a name for it. I don't know the precise name, but like you have flora and fauna on land, you have flora and fauna on the ocean. Okay, so I'm rambling a little bit here. I just looked at the time, so let me move on. But I guess what I want to do, though, is stress to you that this is important for us, okay? So don't dismiss what I'm saying as like, oh, yeah, but that has nothing to do with me. So the purpose of the Act, the Environmental Health Services Act, is to protect the public health and environment, regulate sanitation, pollution, food hygiene, waste disposal, and environmental nuisances. And there are environmental health inspectors who inspect, issue orders, and prosecute offenses. And those offenses, if you are charged, you're going to have to go to magistrate's court and excuse me, and pay a fine. All right. Key offenses that you would want to be aware of: discharging contaminants and pollutants, operating facilities without a certificate of approval, creating and permitting unsanitary conditions, littering or dumping waste in public spaces, failing to keep adjoining open spaces clean, keeping animals contrary to the regulations, improper handling or sale of food and drink, improper transportation, storage, or disposal of waste, operating offensive trades contrary to regulations, failing to report dangerous pollution incidents. And so these are some of the offenses. These are things that you can be charged for under the Environmental Health Services regulations. So what counts? So when we think now about polluting, driving, up and down the streets of the Bahamas. Section 2 of the Act defines litter broadly as dust, dirt, waste paper, bottles, whether empty or not, derelict vehicles, derelict vessels, basically abandoned and old and decrepit, dead animals, and carrion, like bird kind of things. So the section says no person shall create unsanitary conditions or nuisance on premises they own or occupy. So there's a direct obligation on you not to create unsanitary conditions where you live or occupy. No person shall dump or deposit litter in any public or open space, and every owner and occupier must keep the open space fronting their premises clean. Did you know that? That's in the law. You actually have an obligation to keep the open space in front of your premises clean. And if you fail to do that, for a first offense, there's a fine of up to $1,000 or 9 months imprisonment or both. So, this is no laughing matter. This is no trite matter, I should say. And then the minister is empowered under the legislation to make regulations for removal and disposal of derelict and abandoned vehicles, solid waste disposal, and litter prevention and control. So the law provides that the minister can make regulations to manage and control the removal and transportation and disposal of waste across the Bahamas. So now, let me tell you a little bit more about some of these roles. Now, I know that mainly I want to focus on, garbage removal because it's an eyesore and a health sore for all of us. And one of the things that I learned that I definitely want to share with you is that, remember, I just said that the government has responsibility for solid waste disposal. So this includes, removing your bulk waste. And I was informed by the officers at Environmental Health that if you put your bulk waste outside in front of your yard near to I guess next door to the garbage bin, they will move it and you don't have to pay to have it removed. So there's no reason for indiscriminate dumping. Illegal and indiscriminate dumping will cause you to get served with a citation. And if you don't comply, then you can be charged and the fines that I mentioned will apply. But so the way it works is that the ministry has it set up so that for residences and units, triplex units or below, so single family dwellings, duplexes and triplexes, the government is responsible for removing your solid waste, okay, regular garbage, and then these bulk items. And government pays for that. So that's a service that is available to us that we don't have to pay for. Now, they don't have the regular garbage trucks that they used to have in the past, where the ministry owned and maintained those vehicles and they would go across the length and breadth of the island and pick up your garbage. However, the government pays contractors to do it on its behalf so that you still don't have to pay, but now it's done through a contractor as opposed to directly through the Department of Environmental Health Services. But it's still a service that is available to us. Now, if if the premises are larger than a triplex, so a fourplex and up, and commercial buildings, then the owners of those buildings are responsible to pay for the removal of their solid waste. And then you can take it, it's taken to the, what they call the New Providence Ecology Park, and it's treated there. So again, it's a service, even though you will have to pay for the transportation of it. This is for buildings of above the size of a triplex and businesses. You don't have to pay for the treatment of it, and there's a place that you can carry it. So again, a service that the Environmental Health Services Department provides. So that is the that's what the law and the regulations say about removal of solid waste. So remember, for indiscriminate dumping, if someone makes a report to the Department of Environmental Health Services, and there's sufficient information, you can be charged. So there's no reason, people, for us to be throwing garbage outside of our windows. Like, sometimes you see taxi drivers doing it and you think, why? You're on the front line of the tourism industry and they're throwing garbage out of the window. And I wish those of you who see people doing it, whether it's a taxi driver or a private citizen, call the Ministry of Health, call the Department of Environmental Health, and let them know. Make a report. If you see something, say something. And that applies not only to criminal offenses, meaning offenses against another person, but also offenses against the environment, because that's basically what we're talking about here. Okay, and I'm just looking for the number for the hotline, because I don't want to give out the wrong number. So I'm going to find that in my notes in a moment. And then in the meantime, let me just run through some of the other services that the Department of Environmental Health Service provides. So available services would be health inspections, vector control, and so I've talked about bulk waste removal, and so removal of derelict vehicles. That's an important role because it's a breeding ground for mosquitoes and rodents, and those things can carry the kinds of diseases and create the problems for us as a community that can definitely affect our health as a nation. So that's an important service. I didn't know this, something that I learned when I was having the meeting at Environmental Health this week regarding health inspections. So the health inspectors, they inspect every piece, not individually, but they spot check, and they have a remit to inspect all the food that comes into the Bahamas. Every single piece of meat, everything that comes in, a health inspector is tasked with checking the shipments that come in. So meat or food products, meat certificates, they check to see how long the food was in transit. So if it lands in the Bahamas today, they're going to check and see whether it was on its way here for a year or whether it was on its way here for a week, which affects food quality and the integrity of the food. So there should be information that is stamped on the boxes. So they do random inspections for integrity, for freshness, to see whether it's frozen, whether there's any freezer burn, that kind of thing. And they do it in conjunction with the Ministry of Agriculture, Bahamas Agriculture and Food Safety Department. So they issue health certificates, they inspect the food, they make sure that it has an international certificate, and they basically approve the food that comes in as being suitable for human consumption for us in the Bahamas. Every ship that comes in, they're liable to be checked. So all the food that comes through the port, every single business on startup, every new business has to have an annual, has to have, first of all, an initial inspection for human health and safety. Can you imagine? So you can't just decide that you're going to open up a business. They've got to check to make sure that the premises are safe, that they're clean, and whether it's a restaurant or whether it's a beauty salon, the Department of Environmental Health Services has to check those premises and make sure they are safe and fit for humans to be in before you can open your business. And I asked him, I said, all restaurants? I said, what about the little, shacks on the side of the road as well as the big restaurants? Do you check all of them? And they said, yes, they check every single one. And those those business establishments must be checked every single year. Now, I know what you're thinking. I mean, yes, certainly this can create like a bottleneck. It's a huge responsibility. And sometimes businesses, I guess, can be waiting for a long time to get a renewed certificate so that they can go to the business license department so they can get their business licenses renewed. But remember, the idea is that it's for our protection. So even though it can seem like it's a drag and it's a problem, why is this necessary? They're really making sure to keep our entire environment safe, that keeps us healthy as a people, and that keeps us clean, so we're not experiencing outbreaks of horrible diseases. So that is those are some of the things that the Department of Environmental Health has responsibility for. And sort of on the other side of that, now, I've mentioned a few times about health inspectors. I've also mentioned that there are contractors who carry out certain services on behalf of the department, particularly as regards removal of bulk waste and solid waste. And you may be interested to know about how you get to become a contractor with the Department of Environmental Health Services. So I was informed that there's something called an e-procurement website, which is actually a website for the entire Bahamas. It's called MOF Vendors at bahamas.gov.bs. So that's MOF Vendors at bahamas.gov.bs. I believe it's MOF for Ministry of Finance vendors. And then there's something called Bonfire Bahamas, where you can go and register and you could bid for any government contract. So if you think you want to bid to be a contractor for cleaning up Montague Beach, or cleaning up the Western Esplanade, or cleaning up Verges, you can go through this portal for Bonfire Bahamas and bid for a contract. And I believe that they meet on a regular basis to review those contracts. So another bit of information that I'd like to share regarding vector control. I think that there's an imminent program coming, or campaign, I should say, for control of rodents that is going to be starting fairly soon for the Bay Street, Baintown, and Engliston areas, Arawak Key, Junkanoo Beach, and Montague Beach, with an aim for what they call source reduction, which would be for reducing rodent populations. I was learning all kinds of cool information, if I can say, talking about the cycles of rodent control, vector control for the treatment and surveillance of what they call vectors, I think, because they carry their they they potentially carry diseases. So mosquitoes, rodents, and cane toads, which emit a toxin from glands on their back. Now, I know that this is maybe like I'm getting into the minutiae of details, but I really found it fascinating. And it's good to know. So, because sometimes it's a little bit irritating that, when you see these people on the sides of the roads or the trucks are driving by and you think, what is happening? What is going on? But there's a system, there are identified responsibilities and systems in place. And as the officers had told me when I met with them, the aim is to ensure human health. That's like the bottom line of what all of this activity is for. And I said, well, how do we know that you're achieving your aim, that we're doing the job, or that you, as the Department of Environmental Health Services, are doing the job that you're supposed to do? What is the benchmark? How do we know that we're succeeding? And they said, the way that you determine this is by the emergence or non-emergence of health incidents. So the fact that we are not having any outbreaks of diseases within our community show that they are keeping things under control. So despite, people throwing garbage where they shouldn't be throwing, overall, the fact that we're not having outbreaks of, I guess, for example, you've heard of in another country where there was a problem with lettuce grown in a particular place and they had to shut that down. Well, we're not having those kinds of things happen in this country because our environmental health services are doing their part. And then also, so there's a restriction on the outbreak, and then they respond well when there are emergencies. So remember, there was an incident recently when a flight came in from a country that there had been a disease outbreak. And so the ministry people would have had to move swiftly to contain it, to make sure that it didn't spread throughout the community. So the containment of threats and swift response when there are emergencies. So they said that they have a lot of stakeholders, coordination matters between the different ministries. So you'd have the Ministry of Health, the Public Health Department, the Agriculture Department, as well as the Environmental Health Department. All of these organizations that work together and cooperate together to keep us and our environment safe. So we have a role, not dumping, putting our waste out to be collected, and that's a service that is provided for us. And then and reporting. So you don't dump, and you report if you see someone dumping. Call the ministry, call the police, provide the information, and then follow up, because too much slackness is not helping us. We each have a role to play. So while I may not be involved directly in the tourism industry, I don't work in the hotel, I'm not a taxi driver, I'm not interacting on a daily basis or regular basis with visitors to our shores. I have a part, you have a part in maintaining a clean and healthy environment, which is for the benefit of us all. So what's your responsibility? Keeping your own premises and the open space in front of it clean. Disposing, that's one. Disposing of solid or liquid waste only through approved means, that's two. Not dumping litter, appliances, or vehicles in public spaces or in the bush. And reporting nuisances and unsanitary conditions when you see them. Okay, so let's run through that again. What is your responsibility and my responsibility? One, keeping your own premises and open spaces in front of it clean. Two, disposing of solid or liquid waste only through approved means. 3, not dumping litter, appliances, or vehicles in public spaces or in the bush. And 4, reporting nuisance and unsanitary conditions when you see them. So I'm going to stop there for today. And I would like to remind you that the law can help you and it can work for you, as I believe I've demonstrated today. It can work for you once you know how it applies. And when it comes to something as basic as where we put our trash, the law is asking something simple. Take pride in this place. It's ours. So join me next week for another episode of Ask Judge Carol. And remember, you can request a free copy of my will preparation kit at any time. Just send me an email at info@judgecarol.net or send a WhatsApp message to 451-4855 and say, Judge Carol, I would like a copy of your free will kit, please. All you have to do is ask. And I will see you next week for another episode of Ask Judge Carol Live. Have a good day.